This is one of the first instruments I ever made, a fretless bass. I made it in 1998 maybe. But this video isn't about this bass. It's about the latest bass I just made, which I'm just about to show you right now. But I wanted to start with that first bass because I feel like they're sort of connected. They're sort of chasing the same dream, but also polar opposites in a lot of ways. Now you'll see in this build, I'm using some reclaimed oak and some locally sourced poplar to build the instrument. Whereas the bass I made back in 1998, you could see, was made of mahogany and ebony, two things that only show up in my shop sparingly and only reclaimed nowadays. When I built that instrument, I really had no idea what I was doing. I just happened to be renting an in-law apartment from a cabinet maker that played a little blues guitar on the side, and I told him one day that I always dreamed of building my own bass, but I had never even used a power tool or a table saw or anything like that back then. And he told me, he's like, "Well, you're crazy. That's too much work. Like you couldn't do that." I said okay, and just went about my way because I figured he knew what he was talking about, and I didn't. A couple weeks go by and I'm walking past his workshop and I see him in there with a shape that looks a lot like a guitar cutout on his workbench. And so I popped in and I was like, "What's going on, man?" And he told me that he went to the local library and checked out some books on guitar making, and he said, "I think I can do this." So I was like, "Well, you need to let me be a part of this." And I joined him. Now, in the whole process, I really did everything just by rote feel. I was terrified of most of his tools in there. I didn't use the table saw, had him do a couple cuts for me, but I basically used the bandsaw and some sanders and some hand tools and made a few instruments. I had this vision and dream back then. I was like, well, maybe I could make instruments someday for a living. But it was so expensive and so time consuming that I just kind of gave up on that idea. I realized that it was just like, seemed impossible to me at the time. But now fast forward 20 something years later, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And so don't give up on your dreams. It just might take a little longer to get there than you thought. But it was in this period of time that I spent all this time sanding and working and going to the lumber yards to buy wood like the ebony and the mahogany that I used for that, and seeing how expensive they were. I would think about them. I just sort of thought while I was sanding, and I was researching and reading books. You know, the internet wasn't quite what it is nowadays, and learning about all these different woods and where they came from. And I started sort of thinking about how hard it was to get them here, and about the people that had to cut it down, and how old the trees were, and how long it took to grow this wood. And it just sort of started sitting with me that maybe this wasn't the right thing to do. Now, back in the 90s, people weren't necessarily thinking about this stuff, and things like sustainable and reclaimed. These were like real fringe thoughts that we were all just living our lives. But it kind of got planted in the back of my head, and it was the beginning of sort of the me that I am today. Started with that bass that I started this video with. So we fast forward 20-something years to today, and I'm making a new version of that same instrument. But I had some things that I wanted to try, a little older and wiser. But the first thing I wanted to do was to make it more sustainably. So you can see that I'm using this locally sourced poplar that I got, as well as some reclaimed oak from my friend Joe over at Urban Miners. He's a local deconstructionist that tears on and saves the lumber from old buildings, and sometimes he scores some of these barn finds of wood that someone's had drying out for a while and whatnot. This is much, much more sustainable than the mahogany and ebony that I used on that other instrument. I kind of like the design of that instrument I made in the 90s. It definitely was fitting the vibe at the time with the sort of slightly offset and the extended upper horn. But, being a little older and wiser, again, I feel like I can do better with keeping with that theme. I like having the extended upper horn because of the balance of it, and I like having the offset and extended lower bout going the other direction. It's a style that's pretty in right now, but I feel like it can be sort of timeless if it's done right. And there were some other things that I wanted to try that are maybe a little unique, that this seemed like the perfect instrument to do it on, and is for design purposes as well as manufacturing purposes. So now that I have all this local wood prepped and ready, it was time to get designing. Part of the idea I was chasing was having the entire top, the fingerboard, sort of just never end. I wanted to make the whole top of the instrument just sort of, one solid piece of wood, and oak isn't necessarily the best wood to use for this, but it's what I had on hand and it seemed like a good way to prototype. So you'll see here that the way my model is created, I have two pieces. Instead of like a body, a neck, and a fingerboard, I have a back piece that is a one-piece neck and body, and then a top piece that is a one-piece fingerboard and body. The two of these will get joined together, and then we're pretty much ready to go. I see this as being a somewhat efficient way to use time and material in machining, as well as an efficient way to put the instrument together if I can get it to work right. So I'm prototyping out of these readily accessible and relatively inexpensive reclaimed and sustainable materials from my neighborhood. I of course use my Avid CNC to cut them out, and while my robotic minions are hard at work, I'll tell you more about the idea. I wanted to really make this whole front piece a showcase of wood, and I wanted to look as less like an instrument and more like a sculpture or even just a tree, really, on the front. So the idea is to put the controls in as much as possible on the back of the instrument. That's why I have a slight recess to the back to where the knobs go, and I have that extended lower bout, that sort of offset bout. It gives me room to where I believe I can put the knobs in the jack and whatnot without them being in the way of me playing. Then the other idea I had is this whole top piece of wood, which will probably be more of denser woods that I can find reclaimed, like kumaru or ipe. I wanted to make the bridge and the nut all part of it. They don't need to be intonatable because it's a fretless instrument. You can just intonate by where you put your finger. When I go to production, I might make the bridge a separate piece because I think that'll be an easier thing for other people to swallow. But you can always just, if it were to wear out, just cut it down, cut it apart, and put something else in. It's, there's no reason why you can't modify it. With just a couple minutes of sanding, I could make that all flat and then just put another new floating piece of wood right on top of it. So this is a way of saving manufacturing time and materials if I can have this all set up to where I can literally, glue these two pieces of wood together, put a truss rod in between, of course, and then put strings on it, and it's pretty much ready to go. That's the idea. But now it's a matter of seeing, what would happen. There were a few problems that needed to be addressed in this design. Some I thought through before I started cutting, and some that I discovered after I cut. One problem was making sure the strings are grounded because of that wooden bridge. I can't do it there. So I made this very simple aluminum plate that is recessed into the back of the instrument that I can ground. And then I broke and I mill in the process. Also, because the top piece was the fingerboard and the back piece was the back of the neck, and I needed to get a truss rod in there, all that math is a little bit different than a traditional guitar. The fingerboard half of it, if you want to call it that, is much, much thicker, which means I had to make the back part of the neck much, much thinner, which meant that I had difficulty having enough thickness back there to get my truss rod in. Now, I could always do a two-sided carve on both pieces and have the truss rod sort of in between the back neck and the top piece, but that's just more machine time I'm trying to avoid. So I did put it all together, and I had the truss rod sort of a little too close to the wood right at the edge there where the neck meets the head, but I think it'll be okay. In the future, I just need to play with that shape there a little bit. Here I am making the back cavity cover. I did a lot of this by hand because I wasn't sure how everything wanted to fall, but in the future the idea would be that the machines would take care of this for me as well. And then the other thing I wanted to have was in that front, I wanted to use the contours in this sort of forever fingerboard to have a place to put my thumb. So I created a little lip in the top. You can kind of see it there as the fingerboard goes on. It goes all the way past the bridge, so there's places to put your thumb. But I don't think it's quite high enough. I think I need to make that a little tiny bit thicker. And I also found when I was trying to do more like slapping type of playing that since everything is so low and flat, I couldn't get my fingers underneath the high strings. So I think I might have to put a little scoop there as well around the pickup. I was going to keep this as a slab, like flat without a belly cut or an arm cut, because I thought it would be the look that I wanted, but I'm changing my mind. I'm going to make it a little curvier. So again, this is the prototype, and that means, prototyping on the computer as well as by hand, living and learning with this, and then going back and modifying the files for a future production run. Of course, there will always be this type of work, the sanding and scraping, that will need to be done, but the closer I get the file on the software, the less of it I have to do. I didn't put a ton of effort into the fit and finish, as you can see here, because this is just for me to experiment with. Just a single active pickup seemed like the right way to go for an instrument like this, and in future iterations I'd like to hide that pickup altogether, but here you can see that all the wiring and everything gets hidden on the back, so the front, you can still see the pickup on this one, but everything else is just buried back there and nobody can see it, and I think that's really cool. And then this bridge, you know, the oak material that I used is probably not the best, but the bridge did seem to be holding, or does seem to be holding for right now, and the nut as well. And I didn't have to do any tinkering with either of those, but what I did have to do is find where the notes wanted to land on the fingerboard. I wanted to do that by hand first, and then I could go in and modify the file to add special custom inlays to sort of help players know where to put their fingers. But in this case, I just drilled some holes and filled them in with some Starbond CA glue to give myself some little visual cues of where the notes will be. And I'll use these as reference too for then creating, you know, some more artistic CNC design in there. So let's hear it. 2, 3. Low E, second E, third E, fourth E, a little sharp, fourth E, fifth E. 5 octaves. This is just a prototype. I didn't put a lot of effort into fit and finish, and I was kind of messing around with it because this is for me to experiment with and develop this product line. There's some things about it I like, some things I don't like. The wood's not the right wood to use for a top like that. It's probably not good enough, but what's really cool is that this integrated bridge here, so far so good, is working. I literally did no carving. I just put strings on it and just strung it like it is. And I just did that really quick and sloppy drilling of position markers because I wasn't quite sure how that was going to lay out. And now I'll use this to create better CNC files. Another thing I've wanted to do for a while is make the controls hidden in the back, which I have done in the past, I suppose, but with this extended body design, you can see it's not an issue to turn the knobs back here and to hit the jack. It's not interfering with my playing at all, and it gives me this nice flat face. I really dig that, and that's something I'm going to continue to develop. So we're pretty close with this. I can't wait to make the next one. Some things that I will change when I make the next one is I want to make this thumb rest lip a little bit deeper. It's a little bit shallow for me. And the other thing I want to do is put a scoop somewhere down here so I can kind of get my fingers underneath the strings and give it a little pop for like sort of slap action. And I'd still love to hide the pickup completely, which maybe I could make some kind of wood veneer for it, or maybe I can figure out some way to mount it underneath the surface. We're going to look into that, but I've done that before with piezo's, and I don't like piezo's. I went with an active pickup this time to see what would happen, and it's kind of interesting. You know, it's kind of fun. I also want to open up this space just a little more to give access. It gets a little tight to reach these high positions, so maybe I'll take some of this horn away, you know? But I'm curious to what you think of the design. You know, I went really small and lightweight with it, which feels really comfortable. It's balanced well. And I think it's, you know, has that sort of modern look, but I don't think it's too like trendy modern. I don't know, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this approach to making a fretless bass instrument. Thank you all very much for watching, and if you like this sort of thing, please support my work on Patreon at patreon.com/TimSway. You get a little bit more access and some kind of behind the scenes stuff there, as well as early access and previews of all these types of things that I do. All right, thanks a lot and be good.